wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And before we get into today's podcast, just a quick reminder to please jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au, and on the front page there's a form to come join our tribe, which means every week you get an email from us that wraps up everything that's happened with Nourishing the Mother for the week, all our podcasts and links, what they were about, blog posts, and so there's everything there if you want to click on it and do some further learning and research and connection with us. And occasionally we might send you an also additional email around some really intimate dive or story or pondering that we've had during our week. So if you would really like to continue to expand the learning that you're doing here with us, then that's a great way to do that. So please jump on and join our tribe.
And this week's topic is mining for gold in your mother wound. And I think it's really apt as we, prepare to reflect on our Mother's Day. It's just about to be Mother's Day here in Australia. And I think for so many of us as mothers, it brings up a whole host of feelings. It brings up excitement, it brings up softness, it brings up, warm memories, and for some of us it brings up pain, right? And so I think it's a really worthwhile time for us to explore this concept of what the mother wound is, which for many of women, perhaps lies dormant until you become a mother yourself. That was probably certainly my case. I think I held my mum on a pedestal, and it wasn't until I experienced motherhood that started to see that, oh wow, there's stuff buried here I didn't know I had that I needed to deal with.
Which is actually really, I've just had an aha moment as you've said that. It's so interesting because in pre-motherhood, you've had your mum on a pedestal, and then during motherhood, you've started to equilibrate and balance that perception out.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite. So I had a really big mother wound that I was aware of and spent years in therapy for, and hated on her my entire life. Had kids, and through that process have created the reverence and the compassion for her.
Isn't that fascinating?
Isn't that interesting?
We've kind of equilibrated in opposite directions.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And and ultimately that's what life's trying to do to us. We're increasingly faced with situations that as long as we run from them, we'll run into. And in the case of where our perceptions are lopsided, we're going to have to see the other side, however long that takes.
And we create the situations in which to do that.
Yeah.
So interesting.
It is. It really is. And I think I wanted to dive into this too, having really sat in more softness for my mum. And I guess looking at my own perhaps judgments, which seem almost so wrong in some ways for me to have, because I do have so much love for her. But it's so interesting to reflect on where they come from and where the story comes from and what my story is in relationship to what I know her story is with her own mother. Because I think I've mentioned this before, she was the youngest of 12, and so she really feels like her mother wasn't really very connected to her as a child and was almost a bit absent. And so that wound for my mum was really for her to try and intensely parent us and be really connected to us. And in this preparation for Mother's Day, I've been really seeking to try and bring some warmth to that story for mum, and been speaking to my mum's oldest sister, who's 20 years older than mum, around whether or not there's any kind of photos that I can give to mum that show my grandmother really in reverence for my mum, because mum's story is that there wasn't much heartfelt love there, because her mum had 11 other children and was widowed when my mum was 1, so she
ran a business.
It was incredibly challenging time. And I'm still digging for that photo, and I would love to find that and give that to her. But it really made me think, what are all the stories that we are telling ourselves that in our perception are almost like our reality, that our mother is that and can't be anything else because that's who they are. There's a reason why we tell ourselves that, because for a certain extent for us, it keeps us safe. It keeps us safe to keep our story intact, and it allows us to then go out and seek all the things that we think we're missing from that dynamic in our own parenting journey, which for so many of our tribe is a journey that's seeking respectful interactions with our children, really
Deeper
securely
connection.
attached, really a sense of being really attuned to our children. And I mean, that's a perception of something missing then if we're deeply seeking that. Some of us choose it because we have fond memories of that same kind of connection growing up, but usually it comes from some kind of void that we think was missing. And as we so much explore deeply in our Living to Loving program, nothing is missing. It's just in a different form than we're seeing it. And it's a beautiful journey to start to dive into, to see, okay, well, if I had this story around my mum of being disconnected, or in your case your story was around her being abusive, where was she all of the opposite of those things? If you have a story around her being really harsh or
narcissistic.
Yeah, narcissistic was another one. Then where was she the opposite of those things? Because she was, and we all are, both sides. But the more we stick to our story, the more our mind kind of stacks up the evidence and gives weight to that story over any other possible reality we could entertain, which then becomes this sense of like a jail that we feel trapped in, which is really disempowering.
Which is so, because this is the part I find really interesting about voids and values, which is what you're talking about, where we spend a whole first week in our Loathing to Loving just nushing out voids and values, because they're essentially what underpin all of our motivations and life awakening, really, and genius and all this. It's kind of the the foundations on which you build upon. And what I find so interesting about it is that to gain wisdom in your healing is to love the void, right? Love the experience that you had, when you can kind of see this universal perfection in the learnings you took out of that, created this type of personality or motivation or seeking of that otherwise you would not have had you not experienced this particular experience. The thing with our stories are they totally serve us, right? So we can't judge any of our stories or any of our perceptions or any way that we choose to see any one person or reality up to a point, right? So they serve us because they motivate us, they keep us moving in a direction in our lives or avoiding a direction in our lives, which ultimately seeks to awaken more of who we are. Until we hit a point where we're then running from it. Because what you run from, you'll run into, right? Yeah. So it gets to this point, and this is usually when we start to see women in our group where they're going, now I'm hitting this wall, or my kids are pressing this button. And now that story is ready to be let go of. It's kind of taken us as far as we can go on this voyage. And we're now being asked by our higher selves really to dismantle that, to essentially gain the next story for our next evolution, right? I mean, it's just so fascinating.
And I mean, and you know this, I mean, you intuitively know this in your life, because it's almost like you go through those phases and you look back on who you were and you're like, I don't recognize that person. And that happened for me today. Like I was at a playground, and it was just a perfect example of this growth, right? Because, I began my parenting journey incredibly polarized, natural parenting.
Man, when I met you, completely different person.
But to the point where it was painful for me almost, because I was kind of so stuck in this way of being the right way that it almost, I was so determined for the rest of the world to see that this was the right way, or the world around me to see that I had the formula for raising an amazing child.
But this is when our story starts to stop serving us, isn't it? Is when that pain gets so big that we're running on it or into it constantly.
And, I would be triggered so much by, friends who'd been friends for ages, or even, by my mum and how she was doing certain things with my son. And
so there's just pain, just hitting you all the time.
Into it. And then so today,
which is so funny too, because the more connection you're seeking with your child, the more disconnection is happening around you.
Yes.
And the more you're seeking peace and harmony, the more there's chaos around you. It's this constant battle to get you to see that you are whole and to equilibrate you, rather than being so polarized.
And to the level of that I was infatuated with my son, the more I was breeding challenges when he became a toddler, or the more one-sided and trying to support him in our family unit, the more disconnection my husband and I came. We're looking back on it, it was amazing to see that what was playing out as a result of my massive polarization. But I also have the reverence now and the knowledge to love the polarization, because to the degree to which you're massively polarized in your thinking and values and viewpoints is the degree to which you can then become deeply integrated, which is, where I'm working and have come back to. The greater the wisdom, right? Yeah, the greater the wisdom, and the ability to be able to go back and pull it apart and understand what's going on. And
so exciting.
I know, right? And I'm sure in 5 years' time I'll go back and look at me now and go, wow, look at how that shifted and changed, and what I didn't know then, and it's just so interesting. And so anyway, today I was at this playground and there was like a natural parenting group there, and I was there with my kinder mum friends, and I knew that it was a natural parenting group because they had cloth nappies and they were wearing woolen jumpers and stuff, and
natural fibers,
so it was very Steiner-esque, very kind of that thing. And I just thought, wow, it was really interesting to sit with myself around what was coming up for me around the labels that I'd put in the past on the two different groups of mothers, right? And
because at one time you would have been on the other side of the fence, right?
Yeah. And judging all the mothers with the prams and the letting their babies kind of do whatever and not really talking to them but talking to each other. And you and I have talked so much that in some ways that style of intensive, kind of this pro-attachment, serving your child's needs before they're even needs, right? Preempting anything, how exhausting that can be as a mother. And, I now sitting with, all these, mainstream mums and kind of seeing how willing they are to kind of just be in the trenches of motherhood and say it's hard and say it's shit and not really feel like they're being around their kids. And, I see the freedom that they have in that, in doing that. And it was just so interesting to observe my transition and my ability to see, and have reverence for both, and see that I am all of these things. I am the melting pot that is a mother seeking conscious, awakening and evolution, and that now I see that there's no right or wrong.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say too. Is you start to see, in actual fact, where you are is that it wouldn't matter which side of the fence you're on. No one is better than the other, and no other has more drawbacks than. And
my son being 4, and spending he spent a couple of hours, after kinder having played with all these kids, and then another few hours at the park. These kids they're just kids, right? And we can have such a firm, strong view on it needing to be a certain way in babyhood for them to be connected to themselves or not carry stress through their life from their big experience as a baby, and you start that starts to fragment,
starts to dismantle.
Once you realize, well, actually you gain a broader perspective.
I think I'd said that to you before too, because I started my journey also holding on to that I do these hard yards and my kids will end up better than yours. And now I realize what total bullshit that was. And it feels good because we as humans, we want we believe we're wired to think that what we value is better. We can't escape that. That's how we're that's our animal instinct. It's competition. It's part of us. But wow, there's an ability to really find freedom when you can look critically at what your beliefs are and why you're holding so staunchly on to those beliefs. And we've talked before about parenting second time around, and you're going into parenting fourth time around, and just how much you'll find that how different you are as a person, how different you are as a mother, and your practices with your fourth child compared to your of course
first. And I think
we're never the same mother.
No. And I think about going back to my mother's story, how she would have been parented being the 12th.
How extraordinary is that her mum essentially had 12 goes at it? Surely she nailed the shit out of some stuff by number 12.
She must have been super organised. But my mother would have been raised by her siblings, really. Which again, if nothing's missing, she got all the things that she thought she was missing.
They just didn't come from one person. They didn't
come from one person. And the wound, going back to the wound, comes when we believe that somebody should have provided something that they didn't. And through our narrow perception, we think that was missing. But in fact, it wasn't. It's just in a form that we haven't been able to go back and look for. And when we can start to see, okay, well, if we perceive that our mother was disconnected, well, who was connected to us at that moment? If we perceived that our mother was abusing us, who was supporting us in that moment?
And this is the thing with family dynamics, isn't it? That in essence, by her mother removing herself to some extent from some of those responsibilities or roles, other people stepped up and into it. And in actual fact, that child then receives values and exposure to genius beyond one person. And we can choose to see that as wounding, or we can choose to see that as extraordinary. And it's the same thing for our own children. And you know, the concept of different carers and going back to work and people doing things differently to the way that we do them, is we can start to think that anything outside of the way we do things is wounding for our children. But that's us running our voids and our story.
And projecting our values onto a situation, onto our children, thinking that ours are better.
Yeah, and that they'll have the same reaction, which they won't because they don't have our voice.
And I mean, I even find that, you know, interesting applying that same concept to a sibling relationship, because so often, you know, before the younger sibling even reacts, you've told off the older sibling. Whereas now, like, what I'm doing is observing. Like, so before I even tell off Hugo for any kind of little thing, I'm observing how Sylvie's reacting, because, again, like, I'm just projecting my own, like, you know, reaction onto a dynamic that I don't really quite understand yet. And so it's just interesting to how the world gives us feedback to help us understand more if we're willing to look.
It's kind of law of the jungle stuff. I'm really fascinated by that in children's play. You know, the whole concept, everyone has a right to feel safe within a playground or a play space, but that there's variations of how they negotiate themselves within that without necessarily needing us to step in and do it for them. But I digress. So coming back to the mother wound, having gone through Mother's Day in the last few days, often that can be, as you were saying, for your mum, quite triggering for some people, because you're having to honour or to spend time with mothers in various forms within your life, and that can be really difficult sometimes, and there's lots of feelings that come up about that, which is kind of the soup that you and I love to be in. So we thought maybe, I know we've digressed a lot to get to this point, but we thought maybe it's worthwhile just kind of hashing out when you're carrying a really wounding mother story, which can be triggered by your own mother, your stepmother, your mother-in-law. It doesn't matter, whatever mother archetype it is that's in your world that you're reacting to, is to start to recognise, what are you reacting to? Like, what is the trait? And therefore, what is the label that you've applied to her?
And start with the biggest button that you've got, because the one who you've got the biggest kind of button on, which a lot of women tend to have on their mother-in-law, that has the potential for the greatest learning, because the more triggered we are by the outside world around us, the more there is in that person for us to integrate within ourselves in our own awareness, because we can't see, well, if you spot a trait or an action in somebody else, you've got it in you to the same degree. You just haven't seen it yet. You haven't been willing to open up and recognize that within you. And the degree to which we make everybody else around us ourselves is the degree to which we become ourselves, and we stand more authentically in who we are. And so a way to do this is to, you know, isolate what that is that you're seeing in them. So perhaps it might be controlling, could be the thing that really, really annoys you in a mother archetype around you. Maybe it's disconnected. Maybe it is, what's some other ones that we've...
Belittling. Narcissistic seems to come up in our group quite a bit.
Yeah, narcissistic. Cold, maybe. Stern. Anything that you're seeing as, you know, one-sided, or particularly, you know, if you've got a definition around a mother archetype around you as being a particular way, and that really gets under your skin, start to ask yourself, and you know, you want to probably list 20 to 30 examples of where the person is not that.
Where they're the opposite of that.
Where are they the opposite of what you're saying that they are? So if you see them as really controlling, where are they happy to let things go? Where are they softer? Where are they more relaxed?
Where are they slack?
Yeah, where are they slack? If it's narcissistic and so that you're seeing them as really kind of selfish and self-absorbed, where are they not that? So where are they more giving to others? Where are they able to put others first? Where are they able to show that they're thinking about people apart from themselves?
And the thing is, it may not be with you.
Yes.
Which is often where we get tripped up, because we're still shoulding. We're still saying, but you should be like that.
Yeah.
Based on your set of values, which are based on your set of voids. Remember, they will have a perfect set of voids that leads into their perfect set of values for their unique genius and service in this world. Now, that unique genius and service in this world may not be motherhood. It may not be mothering you. It may come, well, it will. If it's not you, it will come in other forms. They may be extraordinarily social and be a real glue and, you know, have an incredible ability to connect with friends and create unity with people around them. They may be incredibly inspired by their career. They may be incredibly academic. Like their values do not have to be exactly the same as your values in order for them to be valuable.
Yeah.
So when we're looking for the opposite of someone, we're not saying to you, where are they that for you? We're saying, look at this whole person. Where are they in this world? Because they will be showing up with the wholeness of everything, but we're choosing to only see it. And the thing is, the more you love, the more you can see it's in them and then in you, and the more you can love the void for where it's taken you, the more you can love them for actually providing that void for you. You wouldn't change it.
Yeah, and seeing, you know, this isn't such a powerful way to look at things, because when you see everybody coming into your life to reveal parts of you haven't loved, you then go, wow, like, so interesting that's so triggering for me, because it no longer becomes about that person and that person's problem and a blame game. There's a curiosity that replaces that. There's a willingness to lean into that discomfort, knowing that discomfort holds the keys for your own awakening. You know, there's none of this kind of, I'll get the toxic people out of my life and I'll be free, because the toxic people that you're perceiving are you.
And the thing is, what you run from, you run into.
Yes.
Right? So even if you eliminate this person, it's still coming to you in another person or another form.
And you know this when you see, you know, relationship issues, and you see perhaps, you know, the friend who keeps running it, having the same kind of guy show up in her life, the same kind of destructive pattern within relationships, because until you're learning the wisdom, you keep creating it. This is what life does to us. As shitty as it might feel sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also where you seek a tribe, right? So if you yourself are really struggling to love those aspects of your mother-in-law, or yourself, this is when a tribe really comes in handy, like the Nourishing the Mother tribe, where you go, here's the trait, here's where I'm at with it, and I don't know where to go from here. And then there's this, you know, group of women that just respond with, well, here's how I see that, and here's how and all of a sudden it opens your ability to see wider. And the more you can see wider, the more you can love of that person, unless you're triggered by them, and unless therefore you're run by those triggers. The triggers, if you think about all those ways that you run all of that anxiety and tension and disconnection and discord, how exhausting is just the upkeep of that within you. Imagine not having that. Imagine just rocking up going, cool, okay, she's like that. Fine, have a giggle about it. Laugh at the irony of it. Love with humour what that's brought you. And even when it keeps bringing it up for you, right? So I kind of think this is the gold in transforming that mother wound, so that you don't have to parent or be a certain way to run from being who they were.
Because the more staunchly you kind of create for your children like the opposite of what you perceive was wrong around how you were parented, the more opposition you're going to run into with those you love around you. You know, so there's going to be the opposition with your partner and not seeing eye to eye on your parenting style. There's going to be the opposition with the mother-in-law who thinks you're too hard or too soft on the children. Your own mother who perhaps feels wounded that you don't parent how she parented or something.
Or your children who will do exactly what they need to do to get you to love who she was. Like when I think about my parenting journey, I actually think this is probably where my children have been the most gold, is each of them have reflected an aspect of her that I've got to kind of the point of being her before I've gone, I kind of get how she got there. Maybe she's not so bad because I don't think I'm that bad, you know? And to the point, really, I mean, I would say that I was still running through my first and second, and then, as you know, I had my third, who I definitely didn't attachment parent as intensively, but consciously parented more intensely. And what happened with that was I created exactly what I needed. to create the disconnection, right? Because the more I'm chasing and seeking connection and meeting of needs and filling of all of the voids that were left for me around my mum, the more she like super attached onto that to the extreme, because I'd had the extreme with the others and I had still rolled with meeting needs, meeting connection. So with this baby, I got the one who uber met the needs to beyond what I had capacity to give for me to get to the point of loving the fact that I couldn't meet those needs and then to push her away.
Which was interesting, because when you had this aha moment in our aligned parenting group recently where you realised that perhaps actually the way that you parented could have, you know, played out in terms of their lack of physical mobility.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you were almost picking them up before they even had a chance to learn that.
Yeah.
And this is the power of understanding our dynamic and understanding what's playing out for us, is that our kids are always reflecting it for us too.
Yeah. And it often comes in pain. So the point is, I mean, you can never run from it, but when you start to see what's not working in your life, you can start to ask yourself why and what's the message, and then you have the ability to transform it and empower yourself. And that's where the extraordinary wisdom is. And so much of how we mother comes from, are we running or loving the story of our mother? Possibly her mother.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a generational dynamic, isn't it? So, you know, in lieu of kind of building up post this Mother's Day, we really just wanted you to just sit with what mother stories you were running, both about your mother or mother-in-law, and then how they motivated you into running stories about how you mother or are as a mother. And to start to dismantle both of those scenarios and see where they are the opposite and in actual fact you are the opposite. And then the next step beyond that for us, certainly within our groups and Loathing Loving members only Facebook group, is to look at what dynamic are your children playing for you to get you to own and love and see that. What dynamic is your partner playing for you to get you to own and love and see that? Because the universe is constantly speaking to you in those soupy dynamics of those most intimate to you.
Yeah. It's the most powerful melting pot for learning. You know, I often say, you know, if you want a spiritual journey, become a mother, and become a mother with a willingness to integrate what's challenging you around you, because that's helping you learn more than you can ever learn on a yoga mat about yourself.
It's so true, because you can't run from it.
No, you're facing it all the time.
So if you would love to awaken more, we'd love you to check out Loathing to Loving program and nourishingthemother.com.au/online programs. And you'll see that we have our next 5-week really intensive live round coming up in June. You can sign up and start looking at those 4 modules of content anytime, and you have lifetime access to it, so you can go back to it as often as you like. But we intensively workshop you through 5 weeks. Coming up in June, and we would love for you to really dive into that, awaken more of what's possible for you, and really start to gain the wisdom from your mother wounds and transform the way that you feel compelled to potentially mother or to exhaustion, right?
Yeah.
Transform what that looks like. And we really love your emails and your connection and your Facebook messages and suggestions for topics. We love all of that tribe building, seeing how those ripples are flying out. So please keep doing that stuff and share any podcasts that are really resonating with you, with your tribe, because the more we can build this group of conscious mums really willing to show up for themselves and therefore the next generation, the more transformed this world will become.
Absolutely. It's powerful stuff.
So to connect with you, Bridget?
Yes, suburbansandcastles.com. And to connect with you, Jules?
Is thepleasurenutritionist.com.
And we will see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.